Hey everybody, it's Timespiraled. Welcome back to something a little different today. We are reviewing Aekyu here, and we are reviewing it for the Dandan format. You might be wondering, why the heck would you do that? Well, I really like Dandan. Forgetful Fish is definitely one of my favorite ways of playing Magic these days, and while I might not have the time to do video reviews for all these sets, I did want to do something at least a little funny. So we're going top to bottom in the order I think they were submitted, or maybe alphabetical. I don't remember. There's an order. I can find it in just a second. It doesn't look like it's alphabetical, but it's going to be Aekyu, Hunting Quiet Horizons, Days On, Cosmic Outcasts, Blood Like Rivers, Anachron Reforged, Onigaiko, Future Past, Travasco, and Lost in Place. So I'm going to go with all 8 sets, and I'm going to review them for the Dandan format. So today is going to be Aekyu Idyllic Days by Nyx. We're going to go through the 17 mono blue non-creature cards, and we're going to see if they fit in the Dandan format. So disclaimer, I'm not going to repeat this for every video. I think I'll mention it once in the, if I ever make a Dandan video that's just like straight up what I like, I'll mention it there. But real quick, I believe that in Dandan, the only counter spells should be the Memory Lapse. Dandan should pretty much be the only creature. And then other than that, cards should not affect the power and toughness, because it is important that you do not have to track life separately than 5 hits with a Dandan. And personally, I do not use counters or tokens in my sets. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to talk about the cards that could be used in other people's Dandans that do use tokens and counters, but in mine, I go with a very much like a bar cube sort of initiative where I keep my Dandan nice and lean. So without further ado, here we go. We've got 17 cards to check here that are mono blue. So we've got Tsukuri Lantern Sanctum. This is a land district that enters tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. It taps for blue, and it fixes basics and districts into blue. I don't think I would include this. It's kind of less than a basic island when it comes to the set. There's no other basic lands that are in the Dandan list that I run, so it wouldn't fix it. And unless we find a district land that I really like, and I'm not seeing one here, I don't unfortunately think that Tsukuri Lantern Sanctum is going to be a great fit. Moving along, we have Alone with My Thoughts. Now, this costs blue, it's a sorcery, and it conjures 2 duplicates of thoughts into your hand. I think this is a great card if you are okay with using tokens, counters, or outside material. In this case, conjured tokens that you would keep maybe in a side stack. The fact that it's a blue sorcery that gives you mono blue 1 mana instance that say draw a card is actually quite neat, because it gives you 2 different instances of being able to interact with the top of the library. Even though it doesn't scry or surveil, the fact that it ups you on the amount of times that you can draw a card is actually quite neat. So if you're open to using thoughts, Alone with My Thoughts might be a cool inclusion for you to use. Next, we've got Bird Brains, and unfortunately right off the bat, the fact that I see that it conjures a Stormcrow, which is a creature, and it doesn't have a power 4. Like if it was a 4/1 or it made a Dandan, who knows, could be interesting. But the fact that it enchants a creature and the enchanted creature does not untap, I try to avoid like removal like this. A lot of the removal in Dandan is already pretty strong at removing the good old fish. So the fact that you've already got like 1 mana board wipes, and you've got cards that do at the 3 mana 1 mana range that can remove Dandans, this is like fine even if you can't interact with it much. But the fact that it creates a Stormcrow, I think, is a no-go. I could be interested in seeing a version of this that creates a Dandan, if anybody wants to make an alternative version of this card. Inspiring Vision, I see that it falls into a similar issue. The fact that it conjures an Unsummon and a Concentrate is very neat, but the Voyager doesn't fit here because it's a 2/2 scout creature with prowess, so that kind of falls out of it. But great design, it's an Ancestral Vision, but it always draws you Unsummon Voyager, okay, it's not completely nuts. So Unsummon Concentrate could be nice, either find a removal or find a draw. I think this is the kind of card or effect that could be very neat in a conjure pool. So if it didn't have the Voyager mode, or maybe it had something else at the 2 mana spot, Inspiring Vision could be interesting in a Dandan list that likes having conjure cards. But for me, unfortunately, Inspiring Vision is not going to pass. Thoughts is the card. You see it uses these little conjure borders that is made by Alone with My Thoughts, and I think there are a few other cards that make it too. I wouldn't run the card itself as is in the list, because it's just kind of like a worst consider or opt, both of which don't really necessarily start in the base Dandan lists. But Thoughts is there, not something that I would use personally. Twirl is blue instant, put a flying counter on up to one target creature and then draw a card. If I was using counters, I would actually quite like this card. It's an up to one creature, so you don't have to have a Dandan in play to do it. The fact that it draws a card is always great for 1 mana, and the fact that you get a flying counter actually makes your Dandan aggression viable. Now you have a Dandan that can't be blocked by another Dandan, so that really, I think that could be an interesting addition here. Unsummon is a cannon card. I wouldn't personally include this card in a Dandan format. There's just better removal for it. Flirt with Disaster. Looks like it's a quench, and then it makes put a prowess counter and conjure thoughts. I believe that the only counter spell should be Memory Lapse. If you're anything that you deny on the stack should be putting stuff back on top. It's kind of like the big part of why I enjoy the format. So Flirt Disaster is not going to fit in my Dandan list. Sea Cash is actually a card that I designed. It's really just a reprint of Accumulated Knowledge. I would rather use the canon version, so even though Sea Cash sounds fantastic and flavor-wise would actually fit with Dandan, see, someone's actually getting fished up, I think that running the Accumulated Knowledge is still probably the correct version unless you're willing to just go custom for custom's sake. Fallout is 2 and a blue for an instant to return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If you've conjured this turn, its owner puts it on top or the bottom of their library instead. I'm sure it's a decent removal in the format because it's a 3 mana tuck something on top, but the fact that the owner gets the chance means it's unlikely that the card that you hit, and of course it's a non-land permanent, that really only leaves Dandan. So, the other person gets the choice of where to put the Dandan. That's not so great. Like, if you don't want to draw a Dandan, they can just give it to you. I think most of the time you'd rather just kill the opponent's Dandan. I don't really think there's a lot of moments where you're paying 3 and putting your own Dandan on top. So there could be a world where you do it, but you have to have Conjure to do it in the first place, and that's unlikely to happen. Na has a counter all other spells and abilities, so unfortunately that's going to be a pass. Shiroyuki, the Every Girl. The first 3 are pretty interesting. It's a 3 mana, 3 loyalty. Whenever you conjure 1 or more cards, put a loyalty counter on Shiroyuki. Again, if you're comfortable with running counters and you can track the loyalty, you can run Planeswalkers. Otherwise, just skip them. The 0 is Conjure of Thoughts. I think that's actually really exciting. The -2 is untap up to 2 target permanents. Really great. Unfortunately, the emblem creates 1/1 blue elementals with flying whenever you cast a spell. So that's not going to fit into our... it's not going to fit into our Dandan list. Concentrate is a canon reprint. You can run it. I don't personally run Concentrate. I think there are better cards that you could run in its slot or more interesting ones. But yeah, if you just want 4 mana, draw 3 cards, you can always run Concentrate. And, the art is absolutely gorgeous. So we've got From the Mirror, 2 blue instant, create a token that's a copy of target non-land permanent you control, except it isn't legendary. So if you're fine with running token makers, this is just 4 mana instant speed, make a Dandan, which means it'll have haste, so the turn you can attack with it. I think that's just not quite enough. There's cheaper ways of getting token copies, and supplant form is removal and a token. So I'm not sure I would run From the Mirror, and the fact that it's completely dead because it has to be one that you control. If it was just create a token, it's a copy of target, non-land permanent, except it isn't legendary and it enters tapped or something, that could be quite exciting, because if your opponent has a Dandan, you could end of turn get your own, but, could have been nice, but I don't think From the Mirror makes the list. We've got 2 more walkers here, so they don't make my personal list, but, maybe we'll see if they could fit somebody else's. Alice Wonderbane is 5 mana. When Alice enters, you can gain control of target creature. If you do, Alice phases out until that creature leaves the battlefield. That's a very interesting line of text. I quite like that. +1 is target creature or planeswalker loses all abilities until your next turn. That's also quite neat. That could actually proof your Dandans from some of the negative effects. It has Island Home, essentially, so you could get rid of that. That's quite neat. -2, draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you discard an Alice or sorcery card. That fits very well. And then return all Alice and sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand. That would be an ultimate that fits really well. All right, Alice Wonderbane would actually be a pretty exciting addition to a Dandan list that wants to include Planeswalkers. Of course, it's kind of hard to get your Dandans to kill Alice instead of just going face, but, I think the card's quite exciting. Fiona Tsukuri. Tsukuri? Yeah, I guess it's the same as Tsukuri Lantern, right? Lantern Sanctum. So it's 5 mana walker as well. An uncommon one. That's quite fun. +1 is draw a card for each legendary creature or planeswalker you control, so it's just +1 draw a card. -3 is return another target permanent to its owner's hand. That's relevant. And -7, target opponent exiles their library except the bottom card. Could be a good way of immediately cutting to the end of the game and going to the bottom list. The interesting thing is you both have the same library, so I could see someone trying out a Fiona. I don't think it would necessarily be the first option that I would go for. But I mean, Walker-wise, none of them break any of my rules considering stuff that they make, so could be interesting. And the last card is All the Time in the World. It's a 6-mana sorcery. You take 3 extra turns after this one, but during these extra turns, you can't activate mana abilities or attack. So what that means is you're paying 6, and what really is going to happen is you're going to draw cards. You're going to draw the next card, the card after that, and the one after. So then you're telling me, well, what's the big difference with Concentrate? Not much from what I can tell. If you do get untap steps, but you can't use mana abilities. And because we don't have permanents really without mana abilities, we do have a few cards that have like utility effects, so I guess you could use those, but they usually cost mana. I think the big one would be 3 extra turns. You can play lands. So what this really lets you do is draw 3 cards, and you can play 3 lands if you've drawn them. This could be a really interesting card. I kind of wish it exiled itself, because there could be ways of looping it. So you would go All the Time in the World, 3 extra turn, and I know you can't activate mana abilities, but if you can then pull it, let's say you pass to your opponent and it survives, and you can pull it back with one of your other cards, could be a little annoying. But I think All the Time in the World could be an exciting top end. Definitely the player who manages to reach 6 and then can cast this unopposed and just reload and accelerate their mana. And of course, because you're paying the lands, you're playing the lands, you can't use them during those extra turns, but then you might have anywhere from 1 to 3 untapped mana on your opponent's turn to use with interaction. So All the Time in the World could be really neat. So quick pass, I think it would be Alone with My Thoughts could be really neat if you're okay with using conjure cards. Twirl is great if you want to use counters. And then I said we have the Alice Wonderbane and Fiona are quite neat when it comes to Planeswalker editions. And I think my vote for the most interesting card for Dandan in the set would have to be All the Time in the World, with a close runner-up would be Alone with My Thoughts if you're open to using conjure cards. So All the Time in the World is the only one that fits into the Dandan list that I'm currently piloting. This is the card that I would be printing and might be printing to try out in my list in the near future. So thanks again, Nix, for making a really cool spicy set. Good luck on your MSCM submission, and to everybody else, I'll be doing these Dandan reviews every now and again. It won't be more than 1 a day because it takes still a little bit of time to do these, but hopefully you enjoy this kind of like goofy approach to looking at sets. So with that said, hopefully we see you in the next episode, and enjoy, everyone.